Hi everyone, Dawn here. So the other day I was cleaning out my room and I found a card, which is weird because I don't usually keep things like that. But when I opened the card, there was a letter inside. And when I opened the letter, it was written to me by a woman that is kind of like a grandmother in my life. And the words in the letter were so encouraging, so comforting. And at the time, I guess it meant so much to me that I kept it. I was thinking about this letter because today we're starting a new series that's based on a letter that Paul wrote to the church in Rome. Romans. So Paul wrote a bunch of letters to different churches and different places, and the letters that he wrote were to encourage them, to comfort them. You know, sometimes he'd hear things about the church and he'd want to correct them. Or the church may just be asking him questions, so he'd write letters in response to these questions. Paul's letter to the Romans was his opportunity to really explain the gospel message of Jesus. And what made it a little bit different is that he asked them for their support with his missionary journey to Spain. But we're gonna focus on a small portion in the middle, Romans 8, verses 1 to 17. And there we find our big idea that the Holy Spirit is active in all Christ followers. Paul starts out the book by letting us know as Christ followers, we no longer live under God's judgment. And he lets us know that those laws that they had before that you had to live by or die, those no longer apply either, because we have the Holy Spirit living in us, and the Holy Spirit gives us life. And the reason why that happens is because Jesus came and died for us. He gave his life for us so that we might have life, so that sin would not come between us and separate us from God. So the nice thing about no longer being under the law is that we no longer have to focus on that crummy stuff, on the sin, because that makes us greedy, that makes us envious, that makes us angry. Instead, we can focus on the Holy Spirit and the Holy Spirit being active in us, encouraging emotions like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Let's read what Paul writes next. So don't live under the control of sin. If you do, you will think about what sin wants. Live under the control of the Holy Spirit. If you do, you will think about what the Spirit wants. The thoughts of a person ruled by sin bring death, but the mind ruled by the Spirit brings life and peace. But you are not ruled by the power of sin. Instead, the Holy Spirit rules over you. This is true if the Spirit of God lives in you. Anyone who does not have the Spirit of Christ does not belong to Christ. If Christ lives in you, you will live. Though your body will die because of sin, the Spirit gives you life. The Spirit does this because you've been made right with God. So the quick version, when we focus on the law and sin, that controls us the bad way. What we want to do is focus on Jesus and the Holy Spirit and allow him to give us life and joy and peace. Oh, and as Christ followers, because Christ is living in us and the Holy Spirit is living in us, that means that we get to live forever. Let's read what Paul wrote next. The Spirit of the God who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you. So the God who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your bodies. He will do this because of his Spirit who lives in you. So seriously, the Spirit of God that raised Jesus from the dead, that same Spirit, that same Holy Spirit is living in all of us as Christ followers and is active in us as Christ followers. Now that is amazing. So Paul goes on to let us know that as Christ followers, we have a responsibility. And that responsibility is that we don't allow sin to control us. Instead, we allow ourselves to be controlled by the Holy Spirit. When we allow ourselves to be controlled by the Holy Spirit, we become children of God. We are adopted by God. And because of the Holy Spirit, we now are able to call God our Father. So what does all this mean? This means that when you say yes to Jesus, when you make him the Lord of your life, the Holy Spirit joins with your spirit and you become a child of God. And the Holy Spirit helps us to pull away from all that sinful stuff. That stuff that puts a rift in our relationship and tries to keep us separated from God. But now with the Holy Spirit, we can live a life of joy, of peace, and we're in a place where we can receive everything that God has for us. When we follow Jesus, the same Holy Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is the same Holy Spirit that is living within us. That is so cool. Also, the same Holy Spirit that's active in you is active in me. And that brings me to our big idea that the Holy Spirit is active in all Christ followers. So that's it. That's the end of our story. And I am so looking forward to seeing you for another one.